I woke to a dull droning sound at the window of my bedroom. As I lay in bed listening, trying to place it, the noise was punctuated with irregular, flat chiming, like the sound when you flick a china vase with a crack running through it. I got up and went to the window to find a honeybee lying exhausted on the sill. I could only assume that it had been repeatedly flying into my window pane for the past few minutes and concussed itself. It was bigger than I had remembered honeybees being, and I could clearly see the fine golden hairs lining its abdomen and thorax, the shiny jet of its articulated legs. I opened the window to allow it to fly away, but it sat there, cleaning its antennae listlessly. When I came back to my bedroom later in the day, it was motionless in the same place, dead. The death of the honeybee left me with an unsettled, depressed feeling, even though the day was bright and clear and I had no good reason to be upset. I tried to put the thought out of my mind. I'd been digging in a new pear tree, mud-spattered and sweaty, when an odd figure came lurching towards me through clouds of fennel fronds. An astronaut crashed back to Earth, trailing smoke from one gloved hand. There was a soft thump as it landed on its backside next to me, crushing my newly planted line of runner beans. Anna removed her beekeeping hat and threw it behind her, mauling the few seedlings she had not already damaged in her heavy descent. I've always struggled not to stare at Anna. She's someone that it's hard to look away from, and if you catch her smile, it's impossible not to smile along with her. On this particular afternoon, she looked a little strained around the eyes, a little despondent. They're restless today. I think I've lost my queen. I'm sorry, how can you tell? Instinct. She laughed. No, not really. When they sense the queen is failing, they start building these little hanging cells on the bottom of the comb. It's no problem. They'll quickly make a new one to take her place. Make a new one? That sounds so Frankenstein-y. I always thought they, elected one or something. I thought she might die laughing at that point. In any case, there were tears in her eyes when she finally stopped convulsing. I decided not to confess that I had been entirely serious and that I still didn't know the first thing about bees, despite occupying the allotment next to East Croydon's premier beekeeper for the best part of 3 years, a fault made particularly egregious by the fact that it was almost certainly due to her bees that my plants continued to produce enough fruit and vegetables to keep me fed all year round. Now you've composed yourself, would you kindly remove yourself from my runner bean patch? Your arse is quite sizable enough to damage my poor little green friends. She stretched her arms behind her head and shuffled a few inches to the left. It would have to do. I was perhaps overly protective of my allotment crops, each one being a hard-fought triumph over my north-facing flat and tiny windowsills, and my own inability to remember to water anything. One day I planned to get a greenhouse and lavish my little seeds and striplings with all the attention they deserved, but giving up precious planting space was a difficult choice to make. Anna had no such problems. I had been there the day that she'd planted up her plot, all the new-tilled earth, damp and grey-brown, exposed to the air. When people talk about earth, they use such rich colours: deep chocolate brown, parched red, loamy, humus-rich black. But from my experience, it's all greyish once you get right down to it, or at least it is when you're talking about inner city gardening. Still, even grey city dirt is capable of supporting all kinds of luxuriant plant life, and so Anna's preferred method of haphazardly scattering armfuls of seed, fennel, phlox, sweet peas and stocks, even lavender, which I've never dared grow from seed as it's notoriously pernickety, seemed to work just fine. The rose bushes she had dug in at seemingly random spots and never once pruned or treated to my knowledge. The result was a sprawling jungle of leggy plants with no order or reason, and because it was Anna's, it was perfect. I won't grow anything that doesn't smell glorious, she told me. If it smells good, then it will make tasty honey. The rest of it doesn't matter. I want my honey to be the sweetest and most floral it can be. Of course, having your turnip farm next door isn't helping. If my honey tastes cruciferous this year, I'm blaming you. That was always the point of her allotment, to be a standing buffet for her bees. It seemed to work, particularly in the late afternoon and early evening, when the scent of all the collected plants would rise in a fragrant mist, and hundreds upon hundreds of little carapace bodies would buzz lazily around each flower head, greedily drinking in the nectar. Which brings me back to the day in question, the day she sat on my barely grown beanstalks and told me her queen was dead, or dying. I mean, you almost never see the queen, she said. It's not like I got to know her in any particular way, but somehow I was always quite attached to her. Just knowing she was in there keeping the hive in order, making sure everything was working as it should, was comforting. These are amazing, really. They're not really lots of individual creatures. Each hive is almost like a superorganism, with each individual bee being only one body part, if you see what I mean. The hive doesn't suffer from losing the queen. I don't know why I'm upset about it, really. I wanted most to hold her hand, but with those ridiculous oven mitts that she used to protect them from rogue stings, it seemed like a pointless gesture. I suppose she was the only organised bit of your whole allotment, I joked. With everything else so messy, she was a little ruler that kept everything in line. I suppose she was. We sat in silence for a while, eyes fixed in the middle distance, looking at nothing in particular, breathing in the smell of crushed greens. When she spoke again, I jumped, having almost forgotten she was there. I've never been a very tidy person. Anything I start always ends in a pickle one way or another. Jobs, family life, friends. I just don't keep track of things, I forget, and I don't plan, and I manage to alienate everyone. Keeping bees is the only thing I've ever managed to do that needed any kind of routine. It's tiring, honestly, failing and flailing your way through life like I do. I always wanted to be a woman like you, practical, sorted, always going in the right direction. Good grief, is that what you think of me? I've no idea about anything. I panic and worry and try to draw neat little lines around things and make everything knowable and understandable, and it still doesn't work. I've always admired the chaos, the spontaneity, the sort of joyful creative madness that you have. You're just you, and that's about the highest compliment I can pay you. She looked right at me then, and there was a small smile playing around the corners of her eyes where fine wrinkles bunched and gathered. You admire me then? Did I imagine the archness? The smile was there, something washed over me from the prickling soles of my feet to the tops of my ears, which I already knew had flushed red. Always. Suddenly we were both laughing hysterically, uproariously, painfully. The bees, startled, rose up in a swarm, and we were surrounded by a deep rhythmic buzzing sound as the two of us clutched each other in the warm, sweet air.